When Clint Eastwood arrived at one of Hollywood's most exclusive award shows, he expected an evening of celebration. Instead, an overzealous event coordinator made the biggest mistake of her career, trying to enforce a new rule that would ban Clint from entering. The reason? His silver cross necklace. What happened next became Hollywood legend. Because in true Clint Eastwood fashion, he didn't argue, he didn't plead. He made a statement that shook the entire industry. And by the time the night was over, his response had turned into a viral moment no one would forget. The air outside the Regal Heights Grand Ballroom buzzed with anticipation, the kind of energy only found at Hollywood's most exclusive events. The city's elite had gathered for the annual Silver Horizon Awards, a night designed to honor the industry's most influential figures. The red carpet gleamed under camera flashes, a parade of actors, directors, and executives draped in custom designer suits and floor-length gowns, each more extravagant than the last. Inside, champagne flowed freely, the scent of imported roses filled the air, and waiters in crisp white jackets moved in synchronized precision, serving hors d'oeuvres that looked more like sculptures than food. At the center of it all, an orchestra played softly, providing the perfect backdrop to hushed conversations about upcoming blockbusters, multi-million-dollar deals, and which rising stars were destined for greatness. Then, as if the room itself took a breath, Clint Eastwood stepped through the entrance. Unlike the sea of black-tie perfection surrounding him, Clint wore exactly what Clint always wore: a sharp but simple tailored suit, his signature cowboy boots, and a silver cross necklace resting just below the collar of his shirt. At 94, his presence alone commanded more respect than any diamond-studded tuxedo ever could. He didn't need the fanfare. He didn't need the paparazzi scrambling for a shot. He simply was. A few industry veterans nodded in quiet recognition, appreciating the old-school Hollywood legend for what he represented. A time when the industry was built on grit, talent, and integrity, not just trends and viral moments. But among the newer faces, the social climbers, and those who measured status by Instagram followers, there was a different energy. Clint wasn't flashy. He wasn't bending to the new Hollywood mold, and some people didn't like that. As he handed over his invitation to the young event coordinator at the check-in booth, something shifted. The woman, dressed in a sleek black dress, her earpiece barely visible under perfectly styled hair, froze for half a second, her eyes darting to Clint's chest. She wasn't looking at his suit. She was looking at the cross hanging around his neck. And just like that, the night took an unexpected turn. The hesitation was small, but Clint caught it instantly, a flicker of uncertainty in the event coordinator's eyes as she processed what she was looking at. The silver cross necklace was nothing new for him. He'd worn it for decades, a symbol of faith, of grounding, of remembering what truly mattered. But here, in a room filled with Hollywood's most image-conscious elites, it suddenly felt like a statement. The young woman's polite smile faltered. With a quick glance to her left, she subtly motioned toward a senior staff member standing near the velvet rope entrance. Within seconds, whispers began. The senior staffer, a man in his 40s with the carefully curated look of someone who spent more time at high-profile events than at home, approached with a measured, professional demeanor. But Clint had been around long enough to recognize when someone was about to say something they shouldn't. "Mr. Eastwood," the man said, his voice smooth but slightly forced, "welcome to the Silver Horizon Awards. We're so honored to have you here tonight." A beat. "But before we proceed, I just need to go over a small policy update." Clint didn't move. The staffer hesitated, as if he wished someone else had been given this job. But it was too late now. "We've implemented a revised dress code this year, meant to maintain the event's spirit of inclusivity and neutrality." There it was. Clint simply raised an eyebrow, the smallest smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Neutrality?" The staffer cleared his throat. "Yes, sir. To ensure that all attendees feel comfortable, we've asked guests to refrain from displaying personal or religious symbols, just as a general courtesy. A general courtesy. The entire exchange was happening quietly, but the energy in the room had already shifted. A few nearby guests were starting to take notice. Even the orchestra, as if sensing the tension, seemed to play a little softer. Clint took his time before responding. He could have made a scene right then and there, raised his voice, and put the staffer on the defensive. But that wasn't Clint Eastwood's style. Instead, he simply reached up, thumbed the edge of the cross, and let the silence sit for just a little longer than was comfortable. Then, in a voice low, steady, and unmistakably Clint, he said, "Well, that's a damn shame." The words hung in the air, quiet, yet cutting. The staffer swallowed hard, his professional mask slipping just slightly. He glanced around, as if hoping for backup, and then, as if on cue, security arrived. A uniformed guard stepped forward, keeping his hands respectfully at his sides, but making his intentions clear. "Mr. Eastwood, we're going to have to ask you to either remove the item or step outside." The room was watching now. Conversations had slowed. A-list guests, journalists, even event staff, all waiting to see what the Hollywood legend would do. Clint sighed softly, not in anger, not in frustration, but in disappointment. Then, slowly, he straightened his posture, squared his shoulders, and did exactly what no one expected. He smiled, because in that moment, Clint Eastwood had already decided exactly how this night was going to end. And it wasn't going to end the way they wanted. The silence at the entrance was growing heavier by the second. Clint Eastwood stood his ground, his gaze locked on the security guard in front of him, the silver cross still resting against his chest. The senior staffer cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably, as if hoping the situation would dissolve on its own. It didn't. The young event coordinator, still trying to maintain an air of professionalism, forced a tight smile. She adjusted her clipboard, glancing at the security guard for reassurance before speaking. "Mr. Eastwood, I'm so sorry for the confusion," she began, her voice just a little too polished. "But we have a very strict dress code at the Silver Horizon Awards. And as part of our efforts to make the event as inclusive and neutral as possible, we've asked guests to refrain from wearing." She hesitated. Clint raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "From wearing what?" The coordinator swallowed hard. "From wearing any overt religious symbols." The words hit the room like a slow-moving shock wave. A few guests lingering nearby turned their heads ever so slightly, their interest piqued. The staffer winced as the words left the young woman's mouth, knowing there was no taking them back now. Clint let out a quiet breath, as if processing what he had just heard. Then, in a voice so calm it almost made the moment more unsettling, he asked, "Since when?" The staffer hesitated, so did the coordinator. The security guard shifted his stance, as if suddenly realizing he'd been put in the middle of something much bigger than a simple dress code violation. "Well," the coordinator stammered, "it's a new policy, sir. Just something we've implemented to, avoid controversy." Clint's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. Avoid controversy. He let the phrase sit in the air for a moment. Then, with that same quiet, unshakable confidence that had made him a legend, he took a step closer, his voice steady. "Tell me something. What's controversial about a cross?" The staffer opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no answer, because they both knew the truth. By now, the tension at the entrance had become impossible to ignore. The murmurs had begun. At first, it was just a few quiet whispers, nearby guests exchanging uncertain glances, servers pausing mid-step, camera crews adjusting their focus. But within moments, the energy in the room had shifted entirely. This wasn't just another celebrity arrival. This was something different. Across the room, a group of veteran actors watched in silence. These were Hollywood legends, men and women who had worked with Clint over the years, who respected him, not just for his talent, but for his uncompromising integrity. They saw what was happening, and they didn't like it. But among the younger crowd, the new Hollywood elite, there was a different reaction: disinterest. To them, this was just another outdated figure refusing to move with the times. Some rolled their eyes. Others returned to their conversations, pretending not to notice. But one man did notice: a photographer. Stationed just a few feet away, he instinctively raised his camera, adjusting the lens to capture the unfolding scene. He wasn't sure exactly what was happening, but he could feel it. This moment was about to become something bigger. His camera clicked. A single shot, then another. Through his viewfinder, he saw Clint Eastwood standing tall, hands in his pockets, expression calm but unreadable. He saw the nervous coordinator, the tense staff member, the security guard waiting for orders. He didn't know it yet, but in just a few hours, that photo would be all over the internet. Meanwhile, at the entrance, Clint still hadn't moved. "I've been coming to events like these for over 60 years, he said finally, his voice carrying just enough weight to cut through the noise of the crowd. "And this is the first time anyone's had a problem with what I wear." More whispers, more heads turning. The staffer, growing visibly more flustered, cleared his throat. "Mr. Eastwood, we don't mean any disrespect, of course. We just have policies to maintain a certain atmosphere." Clint nodded slowly. "Uh-huh." Then, after a beat, he asked, "And what kind of atmosphere is that exactly?" The staffer had no answer, and the entire room was watching, because they all knew what was coming next. Clint Eastwood was about to flip the script, and it was going to be legendary. For a long moment, the only sound in the grand ballroom was the distant clinking of champagne glasses and the low hum of the orchestra. But near the entrance, where Clint Eastwood stood, you could hear a pin drop. All eyes were on him. The young event coordinator swallowed hard, shifting awkwardly under the weight of his silent gaze. The senior staffer next to her had stopped trying to maintain his forced smile. Even the security guard, who had been standing firm just moments ago, now looked like he regretted being part of this mess. But Clint? Clint wasn't angry. He wasn't flustered. He was just done. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into the breast pocket of his suit and pulled out his formal invitation to the Silver Horizon Awards. The thick, embossed cardstock gleamed under the chandelier light, an exclusive pass that most in Hollywood would kill to receive. Without a word, Clint held the invitation in front of him, gripped it between his fingers, and tore it clean in half. The sound of paper ripping seemed to echo across the marble floors. A few guests audibly gasped. A server, halfway through pouring a glass of champagne, froze mid-pour. The photographer, still poised with his camera, snapped another shot, knowing this moment would be everywhere by morning. Clint tossed the torn invitation onto the check-in podium, his voice calm and steady. "If a symbol of faith is a problem, then this isn't the kind of place I want to be." The words landed like a punch to the gut. No yelling, no theatrics, just a simple, unapologetic truth. And then, without another glance at the staff, the guests, or the glittering event behind him, Clint Eastwood turned on his heel and walked out. The grand doors swung open as he stepped onto the sidewalk, the cool Los Angeles night air meeting him like an old friend. And just like that, Hollywood's biggest night had lost its most legendary guest. Inside, the whispers turned into full-blown murmurs. Conversations erupted in hushed but frantic tones. Did that really just happen? Did they just kick out Clint Eastwood? Did he really tear up his invite over a cross? No one knew it yet, but in just a few hours, the whole world would be talking about it. By the time Clint arrived back at his home in Carmel, California, his phone was already blowing up. His assistant had left 5 voicemails. His publicist had texted him twice in all caps. Even his oldest friends in the industry were calling to check in, asking if what they were seeing online was actually real, because it was. The story had spread like wildfire. First, it was just Twitter and Instagram. a few stunned eyewitnesses posting about the legendary actor's abrupt exit. But within an hour, celebrity news pages had picked it up. Soon after, major media outlets followed. By midnight, the headlines were everywhere. Clint Eastwood turned away from Hollywood Gala. Here's why. Silver Horizon Awards faces backlash over dress code controversy. Clint Eastwood walks out of event in protest. Fans are furious. And then came the debates. Some people rallied behind Clint, calling the policy ridiculous and disrespectful. This is Clint Eastwood we're talking about. If he wants to wear a cross, let him wear a cross. So we're banning religious symbols now? What kind of message does that send? Clint Eastwood just showed Hollywood what integrity looks like. Others defended the event, claiming private organizations had the right to set their own guidelines. Rules are rules. If he didn't like it, he didn't have to come. Inclusivity means keeping things neutral for everyone. Not everything has to be a political statement. By morning, pundits were weighing in on talk shows. Radio hosts dissected every detail. Even celebrities began chiming in, some voicing their support for Clint, others remaining silent, careful not to take sides. And then, the biggest moment yet. A video clip surfaced, shot from a guest's phone. It captured Clint's final moment at the check-in podium. The rip of the invitation, the unshakable conviction in his voice, and the way he simply turned and left. Within hours, the clip had millions of views. Within days, it had changed the conversation entirely. Because this wasn't just about one man at one event anymore. This was about something bigger, something that wasn't going away anytime soon. Hollywood was in damage control mode. The morning after the Silver Horizon Awards, the entertainment industry's biggest voices scrambled to spin the narrative. The event organizers released a carefully worded statement. The Silver Horizon Awards is committed to creating an inclusive and neutral environment for all guests. Our dress code policy was implemented with the intention of fostering unity and avoiding unnecessary distractions. We regret any misunderstanding that may have occurred. But nobody was buying it. The phrase "avoiding unnecessary distractions" was particularly telling. Social media ripped it apart, with people questioning how a simple silver cross could be considered a distraction. Meanwhile, Hollywood's elite remained divided. Some celebrities publicly distanced themselves from the controversy, either pretending not to know about it or downplaying its significance. "Oh, I heard something happened, but I think it was just a big misunderstanding." I'm sure there were more details we don't know about. I love Clint, but I also understand that events have to maintain a certain atmosphere. It was classic Hollywood fence-sitting, but behind closed doors, some of Clint's closest allies weren't staying quiet. Veteran actors, the ones who had been in the industry for decades, called him directly. "We're with you, Clint. This whole thing is nonsense. They're trying to rewrite the rules of respect, and you're the only one calling them out." And then there were the younger stars, the ones who privately agreed with Clint, but refused to say it out loud, too afraid of being blacklisted by the industry. "Man, I respect you, but I can't say anything publicly. You know how it is." Clint? He didn't respond to any of it. No statements, no social media posts, nothing. Because Clint Eastwood had never been the type to explain himself. But the pressure was building. And when a major journalist finally got him to agree to an interview, everyone knew. The silence was about to be broken. It had been 5 days since Clint Eastwood walked out of the Silver Horizon Awards. In that time, the story had only grown bigger. Cable news channels dissected it. Social media debates raged on. Some called Clint a defender of personal freedom. Others labeled him stubborn and outdated. But Clint? Clint had just gone about his life, unfazed. That is, until he sat down for an exclusive interview with Robert Dwyer, one of the last remaining old-school journalists who wasn't afraid to ask real questions. The cameras rolled. The studio was dimly lit. just enough to give the moment a weight that couldn't be ignored. Dwyer, dressed in his signature navy suit, leaned forward, tapping a stack of notes on the table between them. "Clint," he started, "I have to ask. You walked out of one of Hollywood's biggest events because they told you your cross necklace wasn't allowed. What was going through your mind in that moment?" Clint didn't answer right away. Instead, he smirked. Then, in that low, gravelly voice that had defined an entire era of cinema, he said, "Funny thing about Hollywood, they preach tolerance until they see something they don't like." Dwyer let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "You knew the second you walked out of that event, this would become a national debate, didn't you?" Clint shrugged, resting his hands on the table. "I didn't think about it much, didn't have to." He leaned back slightly, his eyes steady. "Look, I've been in this business a long time. I've seen it change. I've seen the people in charge try to shape it into something new, something modern. But the second you start telling folks they can't wear a cross because it makes people uncomfortable, that's not progress, that's control." Dwyer nodded, letting Clint's words hang in the air. Some people have argued that the event was just enforcing its own policies, that it wasn't personal. Clint's smirk returned. "Policies are just words on a piece of paper. What matters is what they're really about. And let's be honest, Bob, if I had walked in wearing a rainbow pin or a social justice slogan on my jacket, nobody would have said a damn thing. But a cross? That's where they draw the line?" Dwyer exhaled sharply. He knew Clint had a point. Then he asked, "What do you say to the critics calling you out of touch?" Clint chuckled, shaking his head. "I say I've outlasted most of them, and I'll outlast the rest too." The interview ended up being the most watched segment of the week. Clips of Clint's no-nonsense responses were reposted millions of times. And suddenly, the industry wasn't in control of the narrative anymore, because Clint Eastwood had spoken. And when Clint Eastwood spoke, people listened. The morning after Clint's interview, the reaction was instant and explosive. Social media erupted. Hashtags like "Beach Respect Faith," "Let Clint Be Clint," and "Clint Stands Tall" trended across Twitter and Instagram. Fans from all walks of life, Christians, longtime moviegoers, veterans, free speech advocates, came together in a rare moment of unity. Clint Eastwood just reminded Hollywood what real integrity looks like. "You don't have to be religious to see how messed up this is. A man wore a cross and got turned away? Insane." Clint walked away from their fancy event, but somehow they're the ones who look small. Meanwhile, the Silver Horizon Awards were in full-blown PR crisis mode. Their attempt to quietly push a neutrality policy had completely backfired. At first, they tried to double down. A spokesperson went on a morning talk show, repeating the same weak defense. This was never about Clint Eastwood personally. It was simply about maintaining an environment of inclusivity for all guests. But nobody was buying it, because the real question had already spread far beyond Clint. If you have to exclude people to be inclusive, is it really inclusivity? The backlash was relentless. Columnists wrote scathing op-eds. Hollywood insiders whispered behind closed doors that the event organizers had made a massive mistake. Some celebrities distanced themselves, worried that aligning with the event could tarnish their image. And through it all, Clint remained completely unfazed. No follow-up statements, no press releases, no public rants. He simply went about his life just like he always had. Because while Hollywood was busy scrambling, Clint Eastwood was already looking ahead to his next move. And when he finally returned to the spotlight, he did it in the most Clint Eastwood way possible. A week after the Silver Horizon fiasco, Clint Eastwood arrived at another high-profile Hollywood event, but this time he wasn't just attending. He was the guest of honor. The Legends of Cinema Awards was an annual event celebrating Hollywood's most iconic figures, and this year, Clint was being recognized with a Lifetime Achievement Award for his decades of contributions to film, storytelling, and American culture. Unlike the Silver Horizon Awards, there were no rules about neutrality here. The audience was packed with actors, directors, and industry figures. But this time, no one was whispering about what Clint was wearing. Because, of course, Clint Eastwood walked in wearing the exact same silver cross around his neck. And this time, nobody dared to say a word. When it was finally time for his speech, Clint took the stage, walking with the same slow, deliberate confidence that had made him a legend. The room fell silent. For a few moments, he just stood there, letting the anticipation build. Then, in that unmistakable gravelly voice, he spoke. "You know, I've been in this business a long time. I've seen trends come and go. I've seen what Hollywood tries to prop up as the future, and I've seen what actually lasts. And what I've learned is this: dignity isn't about what you wear. It's about how you live." He paused, looking out over the crowd. "And I'll live by my values no matter where I go." For a second, the room was dead silent. Then, the audience erupted. Thunderous applause. Some guests rose to their feet, clapping, nodding in approval. Even a few who had stayed silent during the Silver Horizon controversy couldn't help but cheer. The moment was instantly iconic. Within minutes, clips of Clint's speech flooded social media. Within hours, news outlets picked it up. Headlines declared, "Clint Eastwood's Hollywood comeback, a standing ovation heard around the world." Dignity isn't about what you wear. Clint's mic drop moment shuts down critics. Eastwood's Silver Cross becomes the symbol of the year. And just like that, the entire controversy was rewritten. Because Clint hadn't just won the debate, he had outlasted it. As always, he hadn't raised his voice, hadn't started a fight. He had simply stood firm. And when Clint Eastwood stands firm, the world listens. Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right-hand side, which is even crazier.